Hamilton. I'm here with Michael and Nate. We represent the LBJ Debate Society here at Texas State. We meet every Tuesday and Thursday at 5 p.m. We're the ones who are going to be moderating today's debate. Before we get started, we're going to go over the rules on how this is going to go down. When the debate first begins, each team is going to get a 5-minute opening statement going in sequential order. After that, we'll break the debate up into 3 different sections, focusing on domestic, foreign, and economic policy. Each respondee will be, or each team will be asked a question. They will get 3 minutes to respond to that question, followed by each team down the line, who will get a 2-minute rebuttal. It'll then go back to the first team to get a 1-minute closing statement on that particular question. We will then go down the line so that way each team has a chance to answer each question first. Then after each 45-minute section is done, we'll have a short 5-minute break, then go on to the next section. Before we begin, if you're here for a class, make sure you have signed up with the sheet or get your piece or whatever. We're going to ask that the audience please remain quiet while the debate goes on, so that way there's clarity for all the speakers up here. We don't have any microphones or anything like that. So please, if you feel strongly about certain positions or certain things that are said, please keep those feelings to yourself. Try not to interrupt any of the speakers. We want to keep this as civil as possible and have good discourse from every team member here. With that, we'll go ahead and get started. Alright, if we can go ahead and start going from left to right. Each team will get a 5-minute opening statement. Nate will be keeping time. He'll show the time card going down from 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 30 seconds, and then hold a stop sign. Once your time is done, you will clap once, signifying that your time to speak is ended.
Good evening, Bobcats. This evening I'd like to thank everyone in the audience for attending the debate, as well as our fellow panelists. I wish them luck, and especially to the debate club for putting this together with college Democrats. My name is Ryan Cook. My fellow team members here are Natalia Roberfuerte and Kennedy Swift. We are here representing the political party Socialist Alternative. We are also a political group on campus. We've been very active over the past couple semesters. You may know of us from Million Student March, some of the pro-choice protests against some of the hate groups that showed up on campus the past 2 semesters. Our position is that only the working class and oppressed, organized into a revolutionary party, can lead society out of global capitalism. We believe that global capitalism is ultimately an extremely destructive force which causes capital, causes wealth and power to accumulate among a small percentage of the ruling elite. This is happening at an increasingly rapid pace. So we believe we have kind of a time limit here to combat this on a global level. And we are also firm internationalists. We oppose all forms of oppression, including racism, sexism, homophobia, and transphobia. Over the course of this debate, we hope it will become clear that instead of 4 distinct positions up here, there are really actually only 2 positions. On one side will stand the idealistic and utopian positions, not ours, the idealistic and utopian positions of the 3 capitalist parties that lean on a bureaucratic welfare state, a culture of fear and backwards traditionalism, or an entirely ungrounded faith in a free market abstraction which does not actually exist. All in order to support a capitalist system that today has no historical or factual reason to be supported. On the other side of the debate, we will stand on the concrete and practical arguments of our party, Socialist Alternative. Where the Democrats lean on the welfare state, we will lean on the workers themselves. Instead of the Republican culture of fear and chauvinism, we stand on hope and a tradition of struggle and liberation. Instead of the libertarian fantasy of divine markets, we stand on facts and history. These 3 capitalist parties lack a practical plan of action to deal with the very serious problems we face today, as well as anything approaching a vision of the future. Socialist Alternative, however, has both, and we've come here this evening to make our case to the audience.
We're College Democrats. I am the Vice President, May Olvera. This is...
JP Olvera.
And my name is David Eisenberg.
Alright, so I'll just read you guys a quick little bio. College Democrats in Texas State is proud to offer progressive students a voice on campus and a way to make a difference in our community and across Hays County. We're committed to registering new voters, getting students out to vote, upholding democratic values on campus, and developing new progressive leaders. Since 1968, College Democrats have been working hard to keep Texas State active and engaged in politics. This year, we have registered hundreds of new voters, worked on 2 city council campaigns, successfully contributing to both of their wins, and we now have 5 Democrats on city council because of the work that we have put in. We hosted Wendy Davis in February, where she talked about her time in the Texas Senate, campaigning for governor, and what was next for her. We will be working hard this fall to elect Democrats up and down the ballot and to turn out more voters than ever on campus. Thank you.
Well, good evening. I'm mighty happy to see everybody here tonight. It's really a beautiful thing when people our age can get into politics. It's impressive that we're here able to talk about these important issues. My name is Connor Clegg. I'm representing the College Republicans. This is Maggie Shivers, and this is Colton Duncan, amongst a few other wonderful folks over here. As the College Republicans, we are a bit of a, for lack of a better word, a minority here on campus. You don't see a lot of right-wing college students, but we're proud of that. We're proud to be different. We're proud to stand for something like, small government, low taxes, freedom, the right to have a choice. We're proud to stand for what this country was built upon. We're proud to stand for the economic system on which this country was built upon, and that's capitalism. And we're happy to be here tonight, and we hope that we have a fair and well-moderated debate, which I'm sure that we will. And we hope all of you enjoy it. Thank you very much.
Hi everybody. I don't know if y'all can hear in the back. My name is Zach Cronin. I'm a state chair for Young Americans for Liberty. And contrary to what my socialist friends on the end said, we actually do not represent the Libertarian Party. As a 501c3, we're nonpartisan. However, we do represent the ideals of liberty. Debating with me tonight is my not-so-young friend, Matt Oker. He is a college student, though. No worries, no worries. And my good buddy, Chris Solera. Young Americans for Liberty was founded in 2008, following the momentum that was built with the Ron Paul, Students for Ron Paul movement. We now have over 650 chapters nationwide and over 200,000 activists in our network. Our primary goal is to identify, educate, train, and mobilize young people committed to winning on principle. We like to say that we're classically liberal and fiscally conservative. As y'all will soon find out, classically liberal does not mean what it means today. That being said, I'd like to again thank the Debate Club for moderating, and without any due time, let's get this thing started. Thank you. What was your name? Zach Cronin? Thank you. Z-A-C-H-C-R-O-N-A-N.
All right, I would like to thank each organization for their opening statement. With that, we'll begin with the first section of questions that will cover domestic policy. We'll start on the left, going to the right in order. The first question: what, if anything, should be done about the high rate of incarceration for African Americans? You have 3 minutes to respond.
I think that the best and most immediate way we can combat this issue is to tackle the war on drugs. Currently, the United States holds 25% of the world's incarcerated population. Drug use is comparable across race lines, but imprisonment for drug use hits blacks and Latinos far harder. They make up 80% of people in federal and state prisons. The Nixon administration has come out and said that the war on drugs was meant for targeting Black Americans and the anti-war movement. I have a quote here from former domestic policy chief John Ehrlichman, where he said, "We knew we couldn't make it illegal to be either against the war or black, but by getting the public to associate the hippies with marijuana and the black with heroin, and then criminalizing them heavily, we could disrupt these communities." To conquer this prison industrial complex, we suggest decriminalizing drugs and treating drug addiction as a medical condition rather than a crime. The United States should adopt progressive policies that give people the tools they need to heal from drug addiction. Jail time does not fix a junkie. We need to stop the cycle of incarceration that destroys black families and communities. Portugal, for example, fixed its drug problem by criminalizing drugs in 2001. Rates of drug use for 15 to 64-year-olds declined over a 12-year period, and drug-induced deaths fell sharply as a result of progressive policies based on rehabilitation, rather than sending six citizens to prison and fining them. HIV infection rates also fell steadily, and the problem has become more manageable. Decriminalizing drugs, along with introducing a Clean Needle Act, can keep disease from spreading through drug use. Additionally, we believe that rehab is a business in America because privatized rehab facilities have no incentive to decriminalize drugs and lead to actual progressive goals.
College Democrats, you have 2 minutes to respond.
I would say we largely agree with what Socialist Alternative has to say. I guess we would like to offer up some more specific solutions, such as, well, marijuana should definitely be legalized, and we should take steps to decriminalize possession of small amounts of other drugs. We would also like to have retroactive pardons for small drug offenders, so that we can, free up a lot of people who use them now. And we must repeal President Clinton's crime limit to our more prior convictions, including minor drug crimes, is given a life sentence. We would like to institute ways through which people can be rehabilitated. For example, there should be court-mandated rehabilitation centers, and there should be thoroughly trained psychologists in all prisons. And once out of jail, we strongly stand behind the Ban the Box initiative for quicker and fair resurgence into society, which allows for people that have been convicted to be able to get jobs easier. We also believe that there should be less elected judges, which would hopefully make room for more diverse criminal justice system. They should be appointed. And just dismantle the prison industrial complex.
Hey guys, so our position is actually in agreement with, I think, with most of what the Socialist and Democrat Party said. We do believe in ending the war on drugs. I think most of us in the party are for at least decriminalizing marijuana. I think another big thing or advantage that we could take in legalizing marijuana is that you would have a huge tax source. Colorado is making millions off of the marijuana industry, and I think that would solve a lot of our federal budget issues, actually, or could be part of the process. So, yeah. So we're in total agreement.
Okay, first things first, let's get one thing straight. All lives matter. The question is too narrow onto the incarceration of American blacks. There are too many Americans incarcerated, period. We have more Americans incarcerated than minor nations. Let's do away with not just the war on drugs, but with mandatory minimums. Let's do away with victimless crimes. For example, there was this court case of Isis Brantley, arrested out in Texas, who fought a 20-year battle in court. She was arrested for, get this, braiding hair without a license. Let's do away with all these asinine laws. Let's start there. So in addition with the war on drugs, let's start with the war on ridiculous laws.
Socialist Alternative, you have 1 minute to close.
All right, yeah, no, I definitely agree that, as I said, we do have a problem to where we have minorities being targeted with these drug laws, and I think that the best way to do that is to decriminalize drugs. I wanted to go more into the Clean Needle Acts. Such policies have seen success in 17 countries and territories in Asia, 29 countries in Eastern Europe and Central Asia, Western Europe, and other regions. They offer advice on safer injecting practices, minimizing harms and handling, as well as give rehab services. But the main thing is that we need to stop treating people as if they're criminals for, these issues that they get largely pushed into due to poverty and due to the government preying upon, a history of oppressive people.
Nice to see we have some agreement on these issues, but now we'll move on to the next area, which is, given recent revelations regarding Snowden's leaks as well as other WikiLeaks files, we want to know to what extent should the U.S. government be allowed to engage in domestic surveillance activities? This question will start with the college Democrats and move on down. Before going to you.
So we don't actually believe that the government should be allowed to engage in domestic surveillance. A lot of arguments to this is, I've done nothing wrong, so I have nothing to hide. But you don't define what's wrong. The government defines what is considered wrong. So you really have no idea to ever know if what you're doing is actually wrong. The Fourth Amendment guarantees a right or protection, and it provides it whether you feel that you need it or you don't. So, we fully stand by the Fourth Amendment. There's no significant data to show that it has stopped terrorism. And we believe that a better way to fix the current, surge in terrorism, which I don't even know if there is, it'd be to provide institutional avenues for citizens so that they do not become radicalized, and to include people into our society more through education or actively fighting marginalization.
I think this question comes down to whether or not we want to have safety or we want to have liberty, and I think that we can have both. Can y'all hear me in the back? Yeah? Okay, good. We want to have both. Now, with liberty, we do not believe that there should be a bulk collection of metadata. It is completely against the Fourth Amendment of the Constitution, which the Democrats stand behind, and so do we. But there does need to be some sort of government surveillance in a very targeted manner so as to protect this country. I mean, there's neighborhoods right now, and there's neighborhoods in Brussels and Paris and even in the United States that are absolute hotbeds of what is to become a potential terrorist attack. Now, things like the visiting of certain websites, the calling of people who are on a known terrorist list, the purchasing of things which could be used to make a bomb, per se. I mean, there are things which the government knows and which the government defines as bad, and I think that someone with common sense would define that as bad, and we need to target those. But the bulk collection of metadata, like the government did with the Patriot Act, is completely, in my opinion, unconstitutional, and it needs to not be done anymore. And yeah.
Our position on this matter is more grave than the positions of some of the other organizations. Domestic surveillance in this country has devolved to such a level that it can be compared to 1984. I mean, there's been proven that public transit buses have actually been exposed as having listening devices inside the bus. As some of the other organizations mentioned, the Fourth Amendment explicitly protects our right to be free of unwarranted surveillance. Now, contrary to the college Democrats, I would say that some very selected, very narrowed surveillance is necessary, but that comes after a warrant is issued. Not a blanket act of legislation, but a very specific scope warrant on an individual case-by-case basis. The fact of the matter is, we've seen over the past few decades, and indeed much of the history of America, the erosion of our civil liberties, of our constitutional and natural rights, and the protection of our of our individual assets and papers and the, the websites that we search, that is no one's business but ours. Anyone who's under the notion of, well, if you don't have anything to hide, then what's there to worry about? That's as silly of a notion as saying, if you don't have anything to say, then why do you need free speech? We cannot allow the continued devolution of the principles that this country was founded on, and one of those is domestic surveillance.
Okay, I think that to first address this problem, we need to establish what kind of domestic surveillance is actually going on citizens right now. For example, supposedly people at some point connected with ISIS and San Bernardino. The FBI cracked iPhones to spy on citizens under pretense of security. However, there's reason to believe the FBI never required Apple's permission for access, as they obtained it anyway. Local law enforcement has already sort of requesting this method. The problem isn't that the government is spying on us, it's the pairing of corporations with the state. All techniques used to advertise to you on a personal level, such as on Google, you see those weird ads. These are also being used and bought by the government. Surveillance is a corporate state nexus scheme. It's bombarded with complex subliminal advertising. And what we really need to do is address the marriage of corporations to the state. I would agree that the Fourth Amendment should protect us from this, but right now it's not, because the corporations are so far entrenched into our government. I'd also like to point out that to close, I would like to point out you're more likely to be killed by a Talmud than a terrorist, and what we need to do is to end hate. The government preys on fears of terrorism to advance corporate state interests, and that is really what we need to combat, and that is our position as socialists.
Okay, so I guess to close out on that, I'd just like to address two statements. First of all, I'd like to address the Republicans that did say that there should be some level to fight terrorism, and I would just like to bring up again the point that there is no significant data that shows that it has stopped any terrorism. I'd also like to say that I do agree with the libertarians in the fact that there should be a warrant before there is a search. That is part of the Fourth Amendment, and we fully stand behind that. And again, I would just argue that if we want to fight terrorism, then we should do it through education and fighting marginalization in this country.
The next question is for the college Republicans. Considering the amount of debate that has gone on around the right to carry a concealed handgun, should there be greater regulation to obtain a concealed handgun license?
I just hope posterity doesn't look back one day and just say, gosh, those millennials, they sure did give up easy. Not necessarily against background checks and all that sort of thing, but as far as I think we can all agree, the very nature of a criminal is that they don't follow the law. So you can put as many of these laws into place to keep responsible gun owners from obtaining a license. I mean, it's expensive. I'm just now turning 21 and I'm just trying to get my license. It is expensive, and it's very difficult to go through these hoops to just, it might be that right-wing conservative nut job that carries a gun, but we're afforded that right under the Constitution. And so any effort to undermine that is, I understand there's there's ideas behind it that may look good on paper, but guys, criminals don't follow laws. You want to kill someone, you're going to kill someone. However you can. If you can get your hands on a gun, I mean, the fact of the matter is, it's any sort of stomp on our Second Amendment right, whether that be increased regulation and increased testing to get a firearm, if you want it, you're going to get your hands on it. So I just kind of think it's kind of arbitrary.
I don't know, from my experience, it's going to take me 6 hours to get mine, and I think $120. which, I don't know, that kind of is probably going to delay me a whole year trying to just get the license, and that's just to get the license. That isn't even the wait for the federal government to approve the license, so it's probably going to take me a year or 2 years to even get around to getting it.
And can I say that some of the cities that have the strictest regulations on gun laws, such as Chicago, they are in absolute, mayhem right now. They have people killing each other on the streets all the time, and they have the strictest gun laws in the entire country. People are getting killed by guns, and how does that happen? We have laws in place to stop that. I just can't understand it. But that's the idea that the nanny state and the big government is going to protect people by putting into place laws because they don't believe that people can protect themselves. We are afforded individual rights in our Constitution, and the government doesn't think that they're worth anything. Man is not free unless government's limited, and government needs to be limited on this issue. We need to back off the regulations, and we need to stop any further attempt to take away our right to keep and bear arms. Thank you.
So regarding this issue, I would actually, not only would I disagree with further regulations on the ability to get a CHL, I would actually contend that we should implement constitutional carry. And as much as I hold the Constitution, as much as I revere the Constitution, the right to self-defense was not granted to us in a document written, 200 years ago. The right to self-defense is a natural right, is a God-given right. Now, this notion that we're going to be able to, do away with gun violence is absolutely absurd. Anyone with a rudimentary knowledge of metalworking and mechanics can create a firearm. There's a guy in Austin who put together the blueprints to 3D print a firearm. Even if you did away with every firearm on the face of the planet today, there would be new firearms created. There would be people using crossbows. I mean, it's not a matter of doing away with this harm. A knife is a tool. Until somebody picks it up and wields it, it's a tool. It's incapable of causing any harm unless it's used. The same goes for a firearm. Furthermore, I did a few little statistics when I was researching this question. There are over 1 million violent crimes committed annually. Where's the law enforcement to protect them in that instance? To add on to that, the conviction rate of licensed peace officers in Texas is actually 3 times higher than the conviction rate of CHL or LTC holders in Texas. So what you can extrapolate from that is people that are CHL holders are less prone to commit and be convicted of crimes than our peace officers. Mull that over for a little bit. The very same entity that is supposed to be protecting us is more likely to commit a crime than the CHL holders that may or may not be in this room right now. Thank you.
Okay, so I don't know about appealing to divinity in terms of natural rights. I think we're past that. But to answer the question, I would say that no, I don't think we need to focus on more regulation with gun laws. I think we should rather focus on regulating corporations themselves. Ideally, every person, regardless of class, has equal access to reasonable self-protection. To handguns, there's really no need for automatic weapons in the streets for citizens or for cops. Mental health screenings and waiting periods are going to be essential, clearly, in protecting people. Gun attacks, I think, are part of a violent culture, and extreme regulation will not change that. There must be a larger systemic change to stem the causes of this violence, such as violent misogyny. Also, in terms of vigilante violence, or rather vigilante, whatever. If you're in a room where there's someone with a gun attacking people, if a cop walks in to try to defuse the situation, he's going to see a bunch of people with guns. He's going to shoot the vigilante as well as the criminal. So I think this is really just going to give more issues. I'd like to end by saying that we are not free until the government is freed from class bias and private corporate interests, and that the state as a corporate-controlled entity does not have the right to restrict handguns from its citizens, and that this is an issue of class as well as
So we do believe in people bear arms. However, we think that there should be things in place to ensure responsible gun ownership, and especially in public institutions. So we think that gun licenses should be required, or there should be a renewal required in all 50 states, just like driver's licenses. CHL courses should be far more rigorous, and mental health screening should be government mandated and government provided. We also think that laws should be far more specific on the disqualifications for a CHL, because there is way too much room for interpretation there. And we need to make sure that the current laws are being enforced better. However, we do think that there should be less monetary limits on CHLs, because like she said, they are like $120, and we believe that does create somewhat of a classist issue, and who can obtain guns and who can't.
We also disagree that the Second Amendment is absolute, because to what point, to what weapon would you restrict it, or would it be okay to have a tank? Because that is a weapon, that is a right to bear arms. So when do you stop?
And I would also like to add, just with this topic, specific to campus carry, to my knowledge, there is no university in the state of Texas that supports the campus carry measure, and that every private institution that has the ability to opt out of that measure has done so. So, I mean, conservatives in the state, they argue we want less government, but yet they're kind of imposing this on us as college students when none of us really advocate for it.
The first point I wanted to make, and I guess I'll go with Connor. When it comes to class, I would like to point out what I mentioned before, that for me, to get a handgun, I will have to pay over $100 and take a 6-hour course. Now, they mentioned class. I would say that the current restrictions that we have now make it very hard for people from lower class or poor neighborhoods to get a gun, and I think that is in and of itself unfair. You know, I'm in the upper middle class, I guess, and I can afford to have a gun, but people who have a really hard time probably can't even afford. So, just to mention that.
Ruth Bader Ginsburg, when she writes her opinions for the Supreme Court, one of her favorite tactics to use is a slippery slope. That's one of her favorite measures that she puts into her opinions all the time. And it's a bit specious. So to say that we don't draw a line at tanks is not sensible.
Moving on down the table, our next question deals with the recent controversy surrounding Planned Parenthood. Namely, should federal funding be available for Planned Parenthood or other clinics that provide abortion services?
That's pretty easy. No. First of all, this document right here is supposed to mean something. You know, we're supposed to be a country of laws. And this is the supreme law. Nothing trumps this. I don't care what any judge says. I don't care what any cop says. This right here is the end-all, be-all for our country. And if you read Article 1, Section 8, there is nothing in there that can even be stretched to encompass funding for a facility such as Planned Parenthood, particularly one that so many of the people in our nation would find some of the services that they provide to be so morally repugnant. You know, Martin Niemöller was famous for his little poem. I'm not going to quote it directly. I don't remember it all, but basically it was something to the tune of, when they came for the socialists, I said nothing, for I was not a socialist. When they came for this class, I said nothing, for I was not a part of them. And you know, be careful what you allow the government to do in your name today, because it will do it against your name tomorrow. And I think that one of the arguments that's been used to fund Planned Parenthood is that, well, they're only funding the portion of Planned Parenthood that doesn't perform abortions. I hope you can understand how ridiculous that is. That's like saying I'm going to put some gas in my tank in my car, but only this gas is going to be used to drive the, you know, after 25 miles. You know, I'm not going to use that gas until I get 25 miles down the road. It's ridiculous. I don't understand why, if this is such a great idea, then why can't we amend the Constitution? You know, our friends on the other side of the political spectrum like to talk about democracy, and they like to talk about our role in democracy and our vote. Well, if that's true, then let's put this to the test. Let's get enough state legislatures, let's get 2/3 of the U.S. Congress to put an amendment out there. But until then, no, we should not be funding Planned Parenthood. If you want to do that at the state level, it would depend on the state constitution in each state. But until that day arrives, no, we shouldn't do it at all.
I'd like to start by saying that as socialists, we believe that health care is a right. The right to live comfortably and to have access to medical care is a human right, and we are in full defense of this position. As for Planned Parenthood, we do think it's ridiculous to only focus on those services that aren't abortion, because abortion is a very important part of Planned Parenthood, and we want to protect that. I'd also like to point out that taking it away disproportionately disenfranchises working class women. Also, preventative care and counseling for these women is very important. Birth control is very important. And I also like to point out that we have a systemic failure of our education when it comes to sex and gender identities. We have no legislation really that's doing a good job of making sure that people are educated in what is safe and what is not safe and what options they have. Also, research, I'd like to point out that the state has no interest in the child after being born, so if you're going to have women not able to get abortions, you need to have some kind of state thing in place to make sure that these children are getting adequate care, and there isn't. But at the same time, we do believe that abortion and health care for women and all people is a right.
As the Libertarians mentioned, there is such a thing as the Hyde Amendment, which says that federal funds may not go directly to abortions except in limited cases of incest, rape, or to save the mother's lives. And I'm just wondering if it's not, helpful in any way, and if it's so worthless, then why do conservatives keep tacking that on to bills? Also, because no federal funds actually go to abortions, then clinics should receive federal funding regardless of if they provide abortions or not. And furthermore, we do believe that through Medicaid, women should be able to fund their abortions either way, and the Hyde Amendment should not continue to be tacked onto the appropriations bill, especially if you think it's worthless and not working at all. Low-income women, and especially those of color, are the ones most highly affected by lack of funding, and by limiting access to abortions, poverty is largely perpetuated, and women are forced to resort to unsafe alternatives. So by giving people avenues to do these things, we can lower abortions.
I would like to make this not about whether or not you think abortion is wrong. That's kind of a personal opinion, but I would say it's common sense that the federal government should not fund an organization that is under investigation for breaking multiple federal laws. That's the first thing. Regardless of whether they perform abortion, I think that's like a common sense critique of the situation that we're in right now. And secondly, when does the government have the right to pick losers and choosers when it comes to programs such as Planned Parenthood? I think the government should prioritize one over the other. That's my view.
It's almost like we have this idea that Planned Parenthood is some rinky-dink post office on the side of the road. No, it's $1 billion organization. I think they might operate without the taxpayer. So we keep saying the government's funding them. No, it's the taxpayer. Let's all keep that in mind. It's the taxpayer that's funding this act, and the fact of the matter is half the country doesn't agree with it. So if they can operate without this funding, why can't this funding go to the free market? Why can't we allocate this funding based off merit? And if they can get this, if it doesn't go to abortion, so this money doesn't go to abortion, well then it goes to mammograms. I can get a mammogram across the street at the hospital. I don't understand why exactly why Planned Parenthood gets this money, why we allocate it to them. That is government picking winners and losers.
I take issue with the assertion that health care is a right. Health care is a service. In order to obtain that service, someone else has to perform that service. If you claim that that is a right, then at some point you are advocating for conscription of someone else's services. That would violate the 13th Amendment of the Constitution that abolished slavery. I think it's a neat catch line or whatever. It makes people feel good to say certain things are rights, but there is no such thing as a right without a responsibility. Nobody's stopping you from getting health care, but you have a responsibility to fund your own health care, period. Thank you.
With that, we close the first section of today's debate, the domestic section. We'll take a 5-minute break before proceeding on to the foreign section. Before we do so, though, I'd like to remind everybody, especially as the questions get heated, for the audience, please to remain quiet and allow the debaters to speak. So far, we've been very good about that, but just going forward, make sure that's all in the back of your mind. With that, we'll take a quick 5-minute break. Thank you. Take your seats.
Sorry, I'm gonna be quiet now.
All right, everybody, please get quiet. The next section is going to be over foreign policy. Since there were a few complaints about not being able to hear in the back of the room, we now have a microphone that we're going to be passing from team to team. We also ask that all the debaters please stand up whenever they're speaking as well to help with projection, so that way you at the back can hear whenever they're speaking. With that, we'll go ahead and get started. Since the Students for Liberty spoke last, we'll now begin again with the Socialist Alternative.
Okay, so our first question is in a post-Cold War world, is NATO still a valuable institution, or should its role be significantly reduced or abolished?
Can everyone hear me? Well, the first point of this question is that NATO, it implies that NATO is a valuable institution, and it's not a good thing. In the Cold War, after the Cold War, either way, despite the rhetoric framing it as a defensive alliance, in practice, NATO actually serves as a bloc of rich North American and European countries, primarily the United States, to enforce their will in the world and threat with military violence. If we are serious about ending colonialism in the world, allowing economic freedom and self-determination of the world, especially the world's poor, NATO should ultimately be dissolved. It was a pretext of like an anti-Soviet alliance, and it's an economic regime, and there's not much to say about that. No, NATO isn't valid.
I was just going to say something real quick. To add to that, if anyone actually looks at the history of the Cold War, you'll find that it's not really a series of wars fought between the Soviet Union and the United States. What it actually is each respective empire trying to keep their immediate sphere of influence in line. So the actual situations during which the United States and Soviet forces clashed are pretty much none. It didn't really happen. That's why it was a Cold War. So what NATO truly was for was to keep South America in line, to keep the Caribbean in line, to keep our immediate economic zone in line, and ensure that they traded with the Europeans, who in turn would trade with us. It was, and primarily is now, an economic regime enforced through military means.
Hello. So in regards to NATO, as Democrats, we don't really have like a position one way or another on whether it's valuable or not, but what we do believe is we do believe in cutting military spending where it's not necessary. And NATO has shown to not be necessary in today's times. So we don't necessarily believe in dissolving it because we believe upholding alliances with our allies and upholding good relationships is a good thing. But we shouldn't be expanding it. We should just be kind of keeping it as is and becoming more of maybe a silent member. We should have more of the responsibility to be focused on our allies in Europe and not necessarily us. And really, when in terms of NATO, the goal should be regional peace, and it shouldn't be necessarily to push capitalism on other countries and to promote American imperialism. The goal should be peace, and we should move past this Cold War rhetoric.
I would like to add that NATO is a good institution in keeping nuclear weapons in place, so there's no way that bad people reach them. It's better for us to have, for some weak state to lose control over its arsenal, and it could go to even terrorists. So I think that NATO is a good institution. We should expand it.
Okay, so the first part of this question that I want to address is the fact that it's a post-Cold War era. Yes, in America we might think that, but if you look to the rhetoric coming from Russia and from Russia's leaders, they say that we are still in the Cold War. In this past year, Russia has deployed 153 nukes across the globe in this past year with the implementation of their START initiative. This is something that is still continuing on to this day that we definitely need to be aware of. And just a few facts, if we don't think that Russia is trying to build their presence around the world. Russia currently has military bases in Armenia, who is on the brink of war with Azerbaijan right now, who is a NATO-backed country. So there's that. Other places that have Russian military bases include Belarus, Georgia, Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Moldova, Tajikistan, Vietnam, and most recently we see them building them up in the Ukraine and Syria. If we don't think this is a real threat, let's look back to the origins of World War I with the Crimean War of 1852, I want to say, in which Russia was trying to improve their influence across the globe and actually went to war with Great Britain and France over Crimea. And today, we have Russians taking over Crimea with no backlash against that at all. Even without Russia in the picture, we have to realize that it's not only the former Soviet Union that's trying to increase their spheres of influence across the world. China right now is militarizing the South China Sea. Whether you believe that or not, it is happening. That's something that is very real and we definitely have to deal with.
So, given the history of American foreign policy, I think it's interesting to note my good friend Bradley and his forewarnings of a Russian aggression. I think that's interesting considering who the aggressor has been in the last dozen or so wars over the past century. It hasn't been Russia, it's been the United States. I also heard Bradley talk about the rhetoric of Russia's leaders and how some may argue that we're still in a Cold War. I also find that interesting considering our troop mobilization along Eastern Europe. I haven't seen Russian soldiers in Mexico. I haven't seen any Russian installments in Canada. Last time there was Russians anywhere near us was the Cuban Missile Crisis, and it was known as a crisis. So, considering that, I think it's totally plausible, and I think it makes complete sense that Vladimir Putin and other Russian leaders would be spewing the rhetoric that Bradley referred to because the enemy is at their doorstep. And unfortunately, and as difficult it is for us to accept, we are the enemy in that scenario. We are. Furthermore, I'd like to question anyone who would support such an institution as NATO, because if history has shown us anything, we've seen the dangers of entangling foreign alliances. As you mentioned, World War I, that was a complete domino effect of alliances and foreign entanglements. I also heard you mention Azerbaijan and the recent conflicts there. What I would ask you is, what would be your solution? If Russia were to instigate a battle in Azerbaijan, is that the prerogative of the American soldier to go back a country that I would venture to guess most people in this room couldn't point out on a map? Is that something that we want to do? Is that the place that we want to put America in? I wouldn't think so, and I wouldn't agree. I think America has absolutely proven our global military hegemony, and we don't need help from any treaty or any alliance.
Yeah, to finish up the question, I'd like to point out that we have the military bases on every continent and nearly every country in the world, and yeah, we have the same amount of nukes as Russia. So, and this whole idea of threat is brought on by a capitalist system and our imperial policy. That opens up countries to our corporate interests. And the talk of NATO being like a horizontal alliance, it really is, it's run by the United States, and it is the United States with their client states. And I think other countries that would agree with the dissolvement of NATO would be countries like Iran, Nicaragua, Argentina, Brazil, Guatemala, Haiti, Paraguay, Philippines, Chile, Iraq, and Indonesia.
Given a civil war that has no signs of ending anytime soon, and millions of displaced individuals spread out across Syria and Europe, should the United States accept Syrian refugees? We'll begin with College Democrats.
So to answer your question, absolutely. We should absolutely be taking in Syrian refugees. Just to start, we've taken refugees, some refugees in the past, such as Cuban and Colombian refugees, and they have shown to integrate well into our society and become a fabric of our culture. But also, looking back, when we saw a really big influx in refugees was during the Holocaust, and America has the bad reputation of sending European Jews back to Europe to die in Nazi Germany and concentration camps. So really, we need to look at history and learn from that. And really, it comes down to that it's just the right thing to do. And really, another important part of accepting Syrian refugees is that it will undermine ISIS. We need to ask ourselves, what is ISIS's #1 commodity? And if we are not accepting Syrian refugees, we are just sending them back into Syria where they can possibly become radicalized and they could possibly, and ISIS could possibly recruit them. And really just a lot of the logic behind not accepting Syrian refugees is just blatant xenophobia and Islamophobia. We need to move past that. That's not what America is about. We're about acceptance and about open arms. And we should take in Syrian refugees to not only undermine ISIS, but simply because it's just the right thing to do.
So the question was, should the United States accept Syrian refugees? Morally, yes, we should. But practically, it doesn't make it much sense because it's only 28% of the nation has supported President Obama's measure to bring 10,000 Syrian refugees in. And on top of that, over half of the states, half the governors have said, no, we're not taking them. So it's been highly politicized and it hasn't gone through the right channels of government. And so, yeah, it sounds great, and I agree. We don't need to scapegoat an entire religion. We need to be compassionate. We can be compassionate without bringing in refugees into a place. That's hard to sell, guys. That's hard to sell to the American people, to say your tax dollars are going to pay for something that makes you feel unsafe. It's just not going to work. But what we can do is we can set up safe spaces. We can set up zones in Turkey or Hungary. There's a lot of other options here. This is made to seem like this is the only option. We got to bring them here. We got to bring them right here at home. There's other options we can do. We can promote capitalism over there. We can give them a taste of democracy. And I think we can see a pretty great change as opposed to bringing in a bunch of people that, honestly, it just makes everyone feel unsafe.
I just want to add a little response to the last question to some of the things that were brought up. Specifically, American involvement in foreign countries. To specify, it's actually been in over 60 countries since the end of World War II that America has militarily intervened. But the defining fact of that is we've intervened in the name of defining freedom against Russian aggression, whatever way you want to take that. And the statement that it's on their doorstep and not ours is, I'm sorry to say, but completely false. If you look at things that are happening around the world right now, Russia is sending strategic long-range bombers armed with nuclear missiles all across the world. Just like to point that out.
All right, first things first, before we get into whether or not we should accept refugees, let's first start by trying not to make more of them. Our favorite president, the Nobel Peace Prize recipient, Obama, continues to bomb Syria and continues to send weapons to Syria and continues to escalate the crisis, so let's hold him accountable for making a bad situation worse. Oh, right, my bad. Also, and on to the integration into society. Let's not talk about Islamophobia, let's talk about Sharia phobia. As a homosexual, there's a lot of people within the Syrian region who are not too gay friendly. And yes, let's talk about fear. Like whenever, like there's a rape, even the refugee camps, looking at the crime data coming out of Europe, they have to make separate camps for female and homosexual refugees. Like, that has to tell you something. Refugees are not even safe from each other inside refugee camps. So yes, there are, so let's have a vetting process. Let's have, oh yes, you wanted to add a little to the...
Yeah, just to add to that, I'm not going to make a moral judgment about bringing the refugees in or not, but I will say this. In 1994, the summer of 1994, I lived on the east coast of Florida. I lived 150 miles north of Miami, and we used to go to the beach on Hutchinson Island, and I stood out there on the beach and watched a lot of those rafts come to the east coast of Florida. And mind you, this is 150 miles north of Miami. And anybody who thinks about these things in a theoretical sense, but has never been slapped in the face with the practicality of these kinds of dynamics, go to Miami and spend some time there. And I don't mean go to a hotel. I mean actually go act as though you lived there for a week or so. Trust me, these culture clashes that happen are not pretty. There are, back in the mid-90s when I lived there, when you got south of Fort Lauderdale, you actually could not walk into a convenience store for fear of robbery. So, thanks.
Well, as socialists, we definitely believe that Syrian refugees should be accepted into the United States because people are fleeing to the empire that has created the terrible situations that they're in and the last economically stable region. The United States created the Syrian refugees and other refugees for that matter through economic and military coercion. Accepting these people into a land with almost limitless resources is the least we could do, especially not even in a moral sense, but in a responsibility sense, I guess. The most we could do is, make sure that these people have, resources, especially since we've exploited their lands and their communities for economic interests that we have. And Hillary Clinton actually, in her emails, she, states the whole situation in the Middle East as like, she supported to overthrow Bashar al-Assad in Syria, cut off supplies in Lebanon, and the civil war has become a proxy war. And Iraq was really what destabilized the Middle East. We have a large involvement with that, and we are the direct cause of what's happening in Syria, and it is our mess to pick up. So, yeah.
So just to respond to some of what things have been said, I think we would agree that, yes, the United States is responsible for causing this refugee crisis, but at the same time, we also need to put responsibility on Assad's regime and on ISIS themselves, because they are also perpetrating a lot of what's happening, even though we also need to take responsibility. As to what the College Republican says, Turkey is now hosting 1.9 million Syrians. Germany's going to take 800,000 at the end of this year. Sweden has already admitted 65,000. There are only 1,500 Syrians in America, and that is pitiful. We need to be doing our part more in the international community and take in more refugees, especially since we have influenced some of the problems that are going on over there. And as far as like making people feel unsafe, I don't buy that whatsoever, and neither should you. There's nothing to fear from these people. They are political refugees, and they're just seeking asylum. They're just seeking a safe place to live in and raise their children.
To our next question. Given the recent political controversy surrounding the issue, should the United States accept the Iranian nuclear deal?
Again, to clarify some points of the question, whether we accept the Iran deal or not is completely irrelevant to the fact of the matter. The Iran deal is already being implemented. They've already been given access to the hundreds of billions of dollars that they were promised through the Iran deal. Everything's already taking effect from the Iran deal. With that being said, I think yes, we should accept the Iran deal. If we decide no, not to accept the Iran deal, all that means is that we're going to go to war with Iran. That will happen. And contrary to popular belief among honestly quite a few Americans, Iran is not the developing third world country that many people think it is. They have a very large, very advanced military, and while I do believe that we would win a war with Iran, that doesn't account for the countless lives that we lost in that war. That's something that I would not be okay with, and it has no reason.
Yeah, to piggyback off To piggyback what the Republicans said, yes, this deal has, as terrible as it has already happened. To renege on this deal comes at diplomatic cost. You know, like pulling out of Iraq, but boom, cheap shot. But again, like the deal has already been said and done. What I want to talk about is why we're involved in this Arabia and Tehran conflict to begin with. Just a 5-minute history lesson. Well, 5 seconds. I don't have minutes, but it is that we had a coup back in 1953, seeing the overthrow. We overthrew and installed the Shah into Iran, which led to a lot of anti-American sentiment. This was, during our favorite Cold War, which really wasn't a war, but schematics. But why involve ourselves into the Middle East? Are we tired of leading American lives over sand? I say, as an American, let's get out and focus on ourselves.
Okay, so the real reason why the Iranian deal was passed is also to imply that Iran is a threat, when really Iran hasn't engaged in an offensive war in maybe over 2 centuries. And you ask anyone in the world, and the United States and Canada and Israel are the only people who think Iran is a threat. Everyone else thinks we're the bullies. And a statement from Obama during the speech was, even in the nuclear issue, if the nuclear issue is dealt with, the Iranians are still going to be sponsoring terrorism, and they're going to have more money to engage in bad activities. But the matter of fact is, billions of dollars the U.S. gives billions of dollars to Israel that has largely done worse bad activities than Iran, slaughtering millions of civilians. That was, the black gold in Saudi Arabia.
Yeah, I'd like to add on to that. We also, our other key ally in the region is Saudi Arabia. They are the actual prime funders and propagators of terrorism in the region. So, in order to understand the situation there, you're going to have to understand that reality. My colleague Chris for YAL said something I think is pretty interesting. That we need to step back and focus on ourselves. Well, we've been exploiting and pillaging what we feel are our rightful economic zone. But we begin a process of reparations and aid toward the regions that we have terrorized.
So in regards to the Iranian nuclear deal, when we look at this issue, we should need to ask ourselves, what is the purpose of this? And the purpose is to stop Iran from obtaining a nuclear weapon. And Iran, I would disagree. Iran is a threat, and they have showed hostility towards Americans. In the past couple of months, they had political prisoners, the sailors that ventured into their waters, and they held them captive. So they are a threat, and we do need to prevent them from obtaining a nuclear weapon. I would agree that, yes, it's not perfect, but it's not meant to be. It's a compromise. Compromise is when both sides give up something so they can come to some kind of agreement, and that's what the Iranian nuclear deal is. And I just think it's kind of abnormal that President Obama shows the strength of his administration, that he was able to get some kind of deal with the Iranians, because we have tried in the past and they just haven't been responsive. So for him to show that he was able to bring them to the table is a great show of strength in his administration. And also, Ted Cruz said that if he was elected on the first day, he would shred the Iranian nuclear deal to shreds. And that's not okay. We need to prevent Iran from obtaining a nuclear weapon at all costs.
I think we're, all kind of in agreement that we should accept the Iran deal given the current circumstances, and I do just agree with what the College Democrats said. The fact that people don't perceive Iran as a threat whenever they refer to us as the great Satan, that they should wipe off the face of the earth, I view that as a threat.
Each year, the United States spends billions of dollars giving foreign aid to developing countries. Some of this money goes towards authoritarian states. Should the United States withhold this aid to authoritarian states?
Well, the answer is fairly obvious. Oh, I hate this thing. Okay. The admirable President Obama, back in, I just love picking on him. Anyway, has made about 7 exemptions to the Child Soldier Protection Act, to where he is allowed military aid to go to 7 nations, which includes but not limited to South Sudan, Chad, Somalia, and many more, to, like again, child soldiers, but the Admiral Obama. Oh, I'm gonna love your rebuttal to this. But yes, stop sending foreign aid to authoritarian governments. And unless y'all want to chime in on this, the answer is fairly obvious. No, just stop. Oh yes, we're in debt. We can't afford to send money out. Come on.
That's kind of like a moot question, in the sense of like, yes, not only should we withhold aid from authoritarian states, but we should also stop creating them. since 1950, or actually for the last, 3 quarters, we've been kind of terrorizing South America and overthrowing their democratically elected politicians who are a threat to capitalism, and putting in, fascist, authoritarian states, making sure that our corporate interests and the exploitation of their resources are still available. So yeah, not only should we not aid authoritarian states, but we should also stop creating them. Like in 1981 to 2011 in Egypt, 2012 to 2013 in Egypt, 1990 to President Chad, 1986 to the President in Uganda, 1987 to 2011 in Tunisia, 2000 to President in Rwanda, 1936 to 1975 in Spain, and 1999 to President, in 1945 to President in Saudi Arabia. Again, it's kind of a moot question. We should stop creating these authoritarian states as well.
I think we can agree to a lot of what the Socialist Alternative says. We should stop creating authoritarian states. However, with our answer, there's really no yes or no answer. Because we think that it should be looked on a case-by-case basis, and what each country, what makes them authoritarian is kind of a little subjective. But also, when we think about this, we need to remember the people and civilians that live in these so-called authoritarian states. They shouldn't necessarily be punished just because their government is authoritarian. If they need help, we should help them in some ways that we can. But we do need to be careful of how that money is distributed. We need to be careful about who we give our money to. But also, just a quick fact, less than 1% of our budget goes to foreign aid anyways. So as far as what libertarians says that we don't have the money to do this, it's not really taking up much of our budget. So that's kind of a moot point.
I'd like to go back to what the Democrats said again, because I actually did think about this quite a lot lately. I heard an argument for providing aid to these states from a businessman who was saying, why should we refuse to invest in, say, like North Korea? Because by doing that, we're withholding aid to people that live in that country. It's not going to take down the top of the government, anything like that. If we invest in those countries, it'll help out the people on the bottom. But then the more I thought about it, that's not what's happening. North Korea is preparing their people for a long and hard journey, and I remember him quoting this, telling his people that they would need to survive on eating roots. As it goes for providing aid to other countries, in cases, say, Africa, if you look back at what George Bush did, he is responsible for the single greatest contribution of charity in the history of the world to Africa, and has done great things in trying to cure AIDS. Bono actually just came out with this really awesome video praising George Bush for reaching unthinkable heights for combating AIDS in those countries. Other countries, North Korea, places like that, no, I don't think that they should be receiving aid from us. That's my view.
All right, to quote college Democrats, what makes the term authoritarian is subjective. What is really subjective about child soldiers? Nothing. Child soldiers are always authoritarian. All right, you got the rest.
I think it's interesting that the Democrats would say that 1% is insignificant. I guess now they're reconsidering their position on the penny plan. I'm glad to hear it.
All right, that brings the foreign section of today's debate to a close. We'll take another brief 5-minute break and then come back to the last section, the economic section. All right, so we will now head into Since we have a little bit of extra time left, the debaters all agreed that we have the room until 9 o'clock. So after we finish this section, we're going to have a Q&A, so the audience can ask questions after we finish the economic questions. So with that, we'll go ahead and begin. We ended with the Young Americans for Liberty, sorry. So we'll begin with the Socialist Alternative. How should the tax burden in the United States be allocated?
Okay, so I think, I don't know how many of you are familiar with the Panama Papers. It's the biggest leak in history by far, by like factors of a factor of like 100. It's outrageous, but what it does point to is a global system of just utter and complete corruption, collusion between corporate interests and state officials and representatives. This isn't an accident. This corruption is accumulating for a reason. Specifically, as to the Panama Papers, the result of a trade deal that occurred in 2011 between the United States and Panama. Some people asked at the time, why do we need to trade with Panama? Well, we didn't. Our elite needed to shelter their money there and steal it from the American people. So what does this imply? The only way that I can see to stop this is we're going to have to, as people, hold our officials to a certain level of accountability. We're going to have to demand transparency in the corporate realm and in the public realm. This will require citizens to demand total asset transparency and to root out the massive corruption that is obviously occurring. This will allow us to discover the reality of ties between governments and powerful corporations and jail those individuals, seize their assets, and use them to rebuild our oppressed and neglected communities. Just really quickly, to give a further example of the kind of situation we're in, if you look at GE, General Electric, more than half of its workforce is abroad and more than half of its revenue comes from overseas operations. It is the largest corporation in the country, but it's not a manufacturing corporation, it's a financial corporation. It operates basically by making money out of nothing. GE is the country's largest corporation, as I said, and it operates largely on a superficial investment basis. This really should give us an idea of not only the modern state of US capital and economics, but really the state of capital across the globe.
Regarding the tax structure, we need a progressive income tax with more brackets and with a bigger share of taxpayer revenue coming from those at the very top. Talking about the Panama Papers, because I completely agree with the socialists. $100 billion every year in tax evasion by these people at the 1%, pay millions of dollars to lawyers, create these shell companies, and that is not patriotic at all. Today we have 1/10 of 1%, that is 1,500 individuals who own more wealth than the bottom 90%, that is 290 million individuals.
So, I'd like to point out that not a single capitalist leader has yet to be exposed in the Panama Papers, but we have found socialists. Furthermore, when we look at how the tax system should go, it's very simple. Everyone should pay their fair share of taxes. That I think we can all agree on. When we look at the tax structure, we have, so far of the 2015 tax deductions, we'll be giving out $1.3 trillion in tax deductions. Our deficit for this year is $550 billion. You know, a while back when we were saying that didn't really matter too much, we don't have to worry about the deficit. If we continue on, then I think we'd be able to, we need to streamline our tax code. You know, if we go back to the 1986 tax reform, we had 2 tax brackets. We saw a better understanding that it further limited what was going on. They fully reduced the number of deductions. Furthermore, we need to cut down on the regulations. There's too much regulations within the system. It hurts business and it wastes taxpayer money constantly if you're worried about Lucy opening up a lemonade stand. Secondly, and one of my final points, is that we need to adjust the tax rates related to the size of government, and we need to allow a competitive corporate tax rate. Thank you.
For those of you who don't know, taxation is theft. I'm hard-pressed to find a proper way to commit a crime, but I'll go ahead and try. First of all, we need to look at how we tax. The 2 most oppressive, most unfair, and most corrupt taxes, because of all the exemptions and all the ways that you can manipulate it, are income taxes and property taxes. Property is the essential building block of the capitalist system, and I know there's some that don't agree with the capitalist system, but I certainly do. But the labor that you put into something is what builds value. And to tax that labor is, I believe it's immoral. And I think that, you know, I'm a guy that came from the bottom, and now I guess technically I'm one of the 1%. But I wish I could have taken every one of you on that journey. When I sat down at my kitchen table after my kids went to bed, and I came up with a business plan on a spiral notebook, not unlike this one. And when I drove past people who were having leisure time on Sunday so that I could go to a hot shop and build iron to build my company, I wish I could take y'all on that journey with me, because it's something that's so deeply ingrained in me. It made me who I am, and I love every second, every bit of sweat I put into it. And I hope at some point everyone in this room can experience that, because it builds so much character, and it's so positive. And then you take that and you can be a positive force in other people's lives. I love to watch my employees buy homes, send their children to college, like this college here. I love those kind of things. And capitalism is what gives us that, and there's no fair way to tax our labor. Thank you.
I'm just going to skip a mic really quick to say that if taxation is theft, then why do you go to a public school?
I'd like to remind everybody that while the debaters are speaking, please be quiet, hold your applause, cheers, or boos if you have them. Also, leave the speaking time for when it is your allocated time. With that, we'll move on.
So yeah, I'd also like to address the concept that taxation is theft. We were talking about the Panama Papers earlier. We're talking about billions and billions and billions and billions and billions of dollars that have been withheld from the public, from the people. Inequality is at a higher rate than it's ever been before in the past. We're surpassing 1920s rates of inequality. Where did these billions of dollars come from? They come from wages. Wages are theft. That's what theft is. Wages are theft. When you have a minimum wage that is so low that you cannot survive on it, where do you think that excess money is going? It's going straight to the top. That's where it's going. That's the theft, and it's happening on a global scale.
Given the controversy regarding global warming, some viewing it as an existential threat to humanity, do we think that cap and trade policies should be implemented within the United States, to combat climate change? Yes.
Just like addiction, the first step is recognizing that there is a problem. But that is not the only step. It is good that more and more people are recognizing that climate change is real and is advancing solutions. However, cap and trade was something that should have been done in the early 1990s, not anymore. We have wasted too much time, and we need an urgent shift from fossil fuels as a whole and towards clean and sustainable energy. Thank you.
Okay, so what is cap and trade? Well, it's basically this nice idea in theory that you've created a free market of credits. And it's essentially the same as allowing businesses to trade credits, buy and sell on the market. It sounds like a great idea, but who sets the credits for those companies? Obviously, that would be done by the EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency. And if we look at what essentially the cap and trade is a carbon tax. That's what it is. And right now, business does not need another tax. If we look at, we keep referring back to the big gap in income inequality and wealth inequality, and that's actually one of the downsides of progressivism, is it doesn't tax wealth, it only taxes income. And the wage you earn comes from business. Businesses pay people wages for the work that you do. When this gets convoluted and allowing government to decide the winners and losers in the economy, just like you can have different types of socialism, you can actually have different types of capitalism. What we are in today is called crony capitalism. Allowing government to pick winners and losers in the economy is not fair.
Yeah, okay, cap and trade. Well, where to start? First of all, it rests on the assumption as to what constitutes climate change and that it's actually occurring, and it's occurring because we have too much carbon in the atmosphere. We can debate that endlessly. But let's just assume that that's true.
Oh, you can't. It's science.
Please, everybody.
What becomes unworkable to those who claim to be so pragmatic is how would you administer this gargantuan plan? I mean, you want to talk about expansion of government. It'll make Obamacare look like a Saturday morning cartoon. The economic impact would be disastrous. It would be astronomical. Yeah, you can't even imagine, especially living here in Texas. I don't know how much y'all know about Texas industry, but a lot of Texas industry would go away tomorrow under cap and trade. Y'all would probably be paying $2,000 electric bills once you finally get your 1,500 square foot home. And it's interesting, a lot of natural disasters cause just as much of the measurable effects that they claim come from industry. And there's nothing, are we taxing a volcano? There's also, I would agree a little bit probably with my friends on the left about the impacts of war. I mean, we do a lot of damage to our atmosphere and our ecosystem in war. But the biggest problem I see, other than the administration and being completely unworkable, is the selective enforcement. Governments love overarching legislation that they can selectively enforce. And whether it's now that your guy is in office or next time my guy is in office, it's going to be, there's going to be selective enforcement. There's going to be political targeting. It happens. It's going to happen. I don't know. I guess I'm at a loss for whatever else to say, but this cap and trade. I guess I know some of y'all in this room are a little too young to remember, but Florida was supposed to be underwater by now, and all the polar bears were supposed to be dead. Thanks.
Okay, we keep, especially from YAL and the Republicans, we keep hearing the concept of government. And I have a feeling this means a very certain thing to them, but I think we know from recent events in this country what government means here. It's regulatory capture. I mean, corporate America has entirely captured the reins of regulatory control. We have no say in these things. Now, some economists may think that the consequence of this is some obscure externality, some external unforeseen effect on the population at large. Well, let me tell you what happens when a corporate entity whose only purpose is to increase profit at the expense of the environment, at the expense of the economy, at the expense of nearly every external factor. What happens is you destroy the environment immediately and for the future. So that's when they're talking about government, we should understand that it's a government that does not represent the people. It represents corporations whom, as we now know, are people, apparently. I guess I'd like to really quickly go into what we could do other than cap and trade. Cap and trade isn't enough. It's not enough to just slap a corporation on the wrist for going a little bit over their cap. Sometimes they'll go over that cap by a rate of tenfold and get the same punishment. It's not going to work. We don't have the time. I think we know that. We are attending a public university. We know what causes climate change. And we don't have that much time to stop it. And the only way is to ensure that our government once again represents the people and not corporate interests who will take the world down and go down with it.
As far as like natural disasters, if we had a democratically elected, centralized economy, these disasters wouldn't be disasters. We understand that nature, things happen, especially with like the pollution we've been putting, we would be able to have relief and yeah.
Climate change is real. It was human beings, us, who have done that. Now, I want to go back to the crony capitalism because I think the definition of what you think you're saying is really not. Crony capitalism means that you give your friends preference over others. That's not picking and choosing winners and losers when you're saying that 1% of the population, the top earners, that is not picking, it's not going to be like randomly you pick percentile of 49 or no, that is not what crony capitalism is. And again, we go from xenophobia, talk about multiculturalism being something we should be afraid of other people that look different from us, and now we've gone to ageism. That because you are older and you are older and we're younger, that we somehow know less, and that is just wrong.
Remind the audience to withhold applause while the debaters are speaking. Wait till the end of their speeches to clap if you agree with what they have to say. All right. Okay. The United States, along with several countries in the Pacific region, have recently concluded agreements for the Trans-Pacific Partnership. Should the United States join this Trans-Pacific Partnership?
So to basically best describe the TPP, and I think one economist put it the best way, it's basically NAFTA on steroids. That's basically the TPP. Should we be in it? I think that we should be promoting free trade in the sense that if we can get rid of tariffs and we can cut through bureaucratic tape between two countries, it benefits both. It's one of the things that led to the success of Hong Kong, and one of the reasons that at the turn of the 1980s, we started into free trade. I agree, NAFTA and TPP need to be worked on. They're really not that great at trade deals. We make them more than what they really are. But at the end of the day, I think that we should be pursuing the ability to focus on limiting tariffs and limiting the ability of government take between two countries. Because we know what isolationism does. When we put the sanctions on Iran, Iran didn't become the next China. Thank you.
All right, before I start with the no on the TPP, I'm going to throw in a cheap shot. The Trans-Pacific Partnership is advocated by my favorite president, Barack Obama, who is a Democrat, so boom, cheap shot to the college Democrats. All right, there's so many things wrong with the TPP, but because of the time constraints, and I will speak slower, one of the main things wrong with it is evergreening. The concept of evergreening is the abuse of intellectual property. The abuse of intellectual property is, evergreening is, okay, let's start with pharmaceutical companies. Multinational pharmaceutical companies will extend their copyrights indefinitely with cosmetic changes. Let's say that there is a cough tablets that they'll take, and they'll change that from a tablet form to a capsule form, then boom, they just extended their copyright, and they haven't done anything significant to the formula. Then boom, they changed the color, then they extended it again. Then boom, they made it nasal spray. Then boom, they done something else that's completely, again, asinine. But they've done this to completely lock out every generic company within the over 20 countries within the Pacific Rim. So there no generic country we can make affordable generic medication which can have millions, hundreds of millions of people who can afford these medications. They are locked out like indefinitely from accessing these medications. That's on top of dozens and dozens of everything wrong with the Trans-Pacific Partnership. But again, cheap shot to the Democrats. Can't wait to hear your rebuttal. Okay, I'd like to reject the notion that the main danger of a trade deal that covers an extreme portion of the globe, that I'd like to address the idea that the danger there is somehow bureaucratic red tape. The danger is not bureaucratic red tape. The danger is that what we are witnessing is the consolidation of corporate power zones. What this means is that within any given area of a so-called free trade deal, what you will witness with these deals is a race to the lowest common denominator between the countries within it, their labor laws, their environmental regulations, the protection that they have against corporate overreach is brought to the lowest common denominator between these nations, and what the result is a massive disenfranchisement of workers, a total havoc wreaked on the environment, and a consolidation of multinational corporate power. We're not dealing with trade deals here. We're essentially just dealing with corporate power consolidation.
Now, this might surprise you. The majority of Democrats are against the TPP. I understand Obama is a Democrat. Oh my God, I love his faces. Anyways, this is an investor's deal specifically tailored to serve the interests of huge corporations. It is structured to undermine a country's judicial entities in favor of corporate profits. This deal is tilted towards capital accumulation of a few global elites over the protection of consumers, workers, patients, and the environment. We are being sold the same old trade agreement from the 1980s, and we should go away from that because insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result.
Do y'all need more of a rebuttal, or is that good? Or, I know he really wanted a rebuttal out of y'all. From what I understood, from what our friend on the YAL side said, you know, despite political parties, despite political differences and personalities and legislation and the way that people vote on certain issues or the way people govern the country, there can be compromise. And, you know, Republicans can appreciate what Obama has done, and Democrats can appreciate or not appreciate what Obama has done. I just want to put that out there because not everybody is so far left that they have to hate everybody that is against their party. But also, the TPP doesn't even go farther enough. We need to bring China more to the table, and we need to address the issue of currency manipulation because it is a huge glaring hole in this trade agreement, and it is hurting corporations and it's hurting the countries that participate in the TPP. So that's our 2 cents on that.
So, after our spirited discussion about the Trans-Pacific Partnership as a specific instance of free trade, one thing that I think was true across much of the table was disagreements and sort of objections to specific portions of the Trans-Pacific Partnership. So our next question deals with, do you think that the United States should continue with a policy of free trade or not? And if not, what does international trade look like to your ideas?
Okay, I think when a lot of people hear free trade, they don't realize it's a misnomer. Free trade is not, it's really not free market economics at play. If it were, I would be in favor of it. But it's the furthest thing from what most people think they hear when they hear free trade. They think they hear fair trade, and it's the furthest thing from that. Imagine two countries that are competing for the world market with some sort of good. If you have one country that's a capitalist country that does not subsidize either the workforce or the product itself or the process by which to manufacture that product, and the other country does, if you don't install tariffs whenever they want to access your market, then you don't have free trade, because they can produce the product at a subsidized rate. And they do it to create a trade imbalance, which is very political. And another thing about these free trade agreements is there's a lot of things tucked into those agreements that limit our autonomy as a nation. And I think we should be ever mindful of that because, you know, when we enter into an agreement, whether it be a military alliance or whether it be an agreement on trade, we should always allow the maximum amount of wiggle room for our government to be mandated by the American public. So sometimes there's strings attached that, you know, the dude can't abide.
I would agree that the system we have, like I said earlier, is not a system of free trade. But the idea that we can't have free market, quote unquote, fair trade under a global capitalist regime, I think is mistaken. We have never actually witnessed a totally free market economy, ever. It's never happened. There has always been large amounts of state intervention, particularly in what we now consider to be the developed world. There has always been, you know, gigantic amounts of state intervention. For instance, during World War II, the government wasn't going to let that war alone to the corporations to take into their own control. In fact, many of those corporations were funding our enemies before we got into the war. Many of those corporations, like General Motors, were funding the Nazis. So you can't trust corporations to go along with the interest of the nation as a whole. Adam Smith knew this, actually. He knew that a corporation would not be concerned with the interest of the public at large. So under a global free market regime, there can be no fair trade whatsoever until we dismantle the accumulation of power and wealth among the global elite who purposely oppress the rest of the world. There will be no free trade.
I agree that there's no such thing as free trade. There's instances where it doesn't cover, for example, like you were saying with the tariffs, but also think of a doctor. A doctor has information, because in free trade, you're supposed to know what the product is and what you're getting and for how much. If you go to the doctor, you don't know because you're not an expert. And he could overcharge you. Therefore, that is not free market. I think we should move away from free trade policy and should move to fair trade that protects labor over capital, the interests of the middle class over the few at the top, and take steps towards sustainable development. Also, another consequence that is rarely talked about free trade is how it encourages these transnational criminal organizations like cartels and terrorist groups who use the vehicles of free trade to their advantage. And these are the most, they commit the most atrocious acts against humanity.
So should the United States continue free trade? Not the free trade we've been going with. Like I said before, the free trade that we should be pursuing is limiting the tariffs between countries and cutting down the red tape between them. It works. If it didn't, cities like Hong Kong back in the 1980s wouldn't be the productivity that we've seen over the last 30 years. Shanghai is also following in Hong Kong's footsteps. So, in general, yeah, I mean, the whole point of even going back to the TPP, we have to focus in on when we can allow people to, we have to somehow get China to the table. They're not going to stop their currency manipulation. And for what a lot of people don't know, is that China is currently selling off their debt hold within the United States. So the thing is that we, with the TPP, it isn't that great because, yeah, what we've been able to talk about is that these trade deals really are complex. Some of the major things, some of the major bills of FDR that we could sometimes go back to and refer to are only about 300 or 400 pages. Look at the Dodd-Frank Act. The Dodd-Frank Act, when you look at financial regulation, really wasn't all that much. And it's about 800 pages. So that's that.
Make no mistake about it, these trade deals are functions of big government. And it's hard to look at these things in a vacuum because my friends on the left that want to do so many things socially, they want to go on these social justice crusades and stuff. You need a gargantuan government to do that. You need a gargantuan government to do all the things they want to do. And yet then they somehow have a disconnect as to how corporations embed themselves in the government. Well, if there wasn't a big old kitty sitting there for them to get their fingers into, then the corporations wouldn't get in bed with government. But you incentivize them to get into government by making the government so doggone huge. I guess that's about all I got.
And that wraps up our economic portion of the debate. Unfortunately, we've had a very spirited discussion, and in the length of that spirited discussion, we have 20 minutes remaining, which is just enough time to allow people to effectively open up or close with their closing statements. So we will have to cut the Q&A portion of the debate, but feel free to talk with representatives.
Should we cut the closing statements and then do the Q&A?
Yeah. Yeah, we don't even have a...
I'd like to hear from people.
Closing statements when we leave the building.
Okay, cool. We'll cut the closing statements, keep the Q&A, line up everybody. Rules for Q&A, you can direct questions to specific organizations. Those organizations will have a minute to answer, and then other organizations will have a 1-minute response if they feel it is the case. But if, as we have found, there are on many issues, that there isn't a lot of disagreement, that we generally agree with each other on a lot of things, which is one of the, I think, balance side of this debate. then we're not going to coerce you in order to say 2 cents and just agree with us. But if you feel like there is major source of disagreement, feel free to raise your hand and we'll give you allocate your opinion and response. With that being said,
So are we gonna just, we're not gonna do the microphone? Or how do you all?
If we can talk loud.
I can talk loud.
Yeah.
I'll hurry the microphone back.
Well, if y'all want to line up, start asking questions, or just raise your hand.
First.
So, how much should we tax the 1%? 1% being the highest income makers or companies, and can we define what the 1% is? It's really like 0.000001, honestly. So, everyone 1 minute each, go.
Who wants to start? Yeah, sure. You got to start every sets of things.
Well, I mean, it's in the opinion of this party that, who asked that question? Where'd you go to? No, that was a good question. In terms of taxing the 1%, the Republican Party doesn't necessarily believe in taxing industrious work, upward mobility. We believe that if you cut taxes on the upper class, you cut the corporate tax rate, then you allow for more taxpayers to enter the system. I mean, it's really that simple. When you tax when you tax what, 84% or 78% or something wild like that, then you are disincentivizing people to do anything. They won't work. You look at Denmark. They have an incredibly high tax rate. People don't go to work, but they do have a low corporate tax rate. Is that true?
Yeah, with regards to with regards to Denmark, they, because that's obviously made into the news. On their, if you correlate their transition, their rate is 55%, and that's actually what a middle class person would pay here in America of about $50,000. Right now, the marginal rate for someone making $50,000 is 25%.
Yeah, I think we should tax them at 0%, like everybody. But I will say this: if we're going to attach a percentage basis, we're going to tax income that way. I'm a firm believer that I'm not against a line under which we wouldn't tax. But I will say this: I think we should all be taxed at the same rate. I think it's immoral for someone who has done well for themselves to be taxed at a higher rate, because I just don't see I don't see it. I don't know. I mean, I get the 15th is coming up and I'm pretty upset.
To add on to that, I think the notion that a lot of people in this room are missing, we can debate whether taxation is theft all day, but there's nothing righteous or morally supreme about effectively robbing me to be charitable with someone else. That's not the moral high ground. That's done at the end of a gun, at the end of the day.
I would say 65%, which is 25% less than the socialist Eisenhower, the Republican.
And the thing is that if you look at that 1%, they're not creating jobs. They're actually just accumulating more wealth. So that's my answer.
Not expanding their business.
Well, I think probably 90% is a good starting point. The largest period of corporate expansion and economic expansion in this country's history is directly following World War II. We actually held 75% of the globe's assets. Never been richer. Never been richer. We taxed the 1% at 90%, and they did pretty okay. I mean, I think we know that World War II and the period after it held some of the greatest economic expansion that we've seen. The idea that taxing people is preventing mobility, there is no mobility right now, and taxes are as low as they've been in recent memory. There is no mobility. There's downward mobility for the majority of the population. rapid upward mobility for only the very smallest sliver at the top.
Cool. I just want to know what you guys think is the best way to deal with the deficit, or if you even think it is a problem for everybody.
The deficit.
The deficit. You think.
Okay, so as far as the deficit, the Congressional Budget Office actually projects by about the mid-2020s, we'll be back to the status quo of running trillion-dollar deficits again. So we do have to deal with our deficit because we have this thing called paying interest on the debt obligations we've already accumulated. Secondly, if we do nothing, I mean, tax reform is going to be coming because by about 2030, on this current route, we'll only have tax revenue for just Social Security, Medicare, interest on the debt, the Affordable Care Act, and that's it. So that's where all tax revenue will be eaten up. Nowhere in that did I say education or infrastructure, the other things we kind of like to kind of go into. But as far as dealing with the debt, I don't think that you will be able to pay it off like Andrew Jackson did in 1835, which is the only year we ever did that. But I do think that it's very important we bring it to a more manageable level so we can do other things.
All right, 3 words. Balanced budget amendment. It's hypocritical for the government to come after you if you do not balance your checkbook and fail to pay a debt owed to them, but for the government not to be expected held to the same standard, for the government not to not even balance their own checkbook, to not pay off their own debt, but to have that debt offshore onto you because it's not their debt, mind you. It's paid off to every single one of us standing in this room. So let's hold the government onto our standards because, let's face it, it's our money, our future, and our children's future that's being dealt with right here. So, on to the next people.
So I don't really know how Andrew Jackson's 1835 America is relevant to today. The sums of money we're dealing with are just in a whole different universe. And in fact, debt is really, if you think about it, in some ways the obverse of capital. I mean, what has fueled the booms and busts of the past few decades are incredible lines of credit lent from increasingly centralized corporate banks to their buddies around the world. I mean, this idea that there is any comparison whatsoever to the situation we find ourselves in today and back then, I don't see it. As far as a balanced budget amendment, this is kind of a red herring. We don't need a balanced budget amendment. This would largely impact poor and working class families and see it that the tax burden remains with them instead of where it rightly belongs.
I would also say not giving Wall Street a $60 trillion bailout would be a good idea.
Absolutely. I think we're all in agreement here that deficit is a problem. It's a very big problem. And we have a responsibility to our children to make sure it's not an issue or that we get it under control. I definitely agree. We do need to hold these Wall Street tycoons accountable when they hijack our economy and when they influence legislation that benefits them and not the people. So to address your question more specifically, there is no one answer on how to address deficit. We need to be creative, we need to cut spending where we don't need it, and we also need to avoid foreign policy blunders like the Iraq War that help put us into this deficit. So we should be more responsible where we spend our money, and we need to be more careful. We need to hold Wall Street accountable for when they break the law.
Okay, seeing as we are all at Texas State, I was wondering if we could bring it back to a little local government. I hope I didn't offend anybody. Student government, do they represent the student body? And if not, whose fault is that, the government or the students that don't vote?
Are you talking about this, whose fault is it, the student government?
Oh, whose fault is it that if the student government doesn't represent the student? Is it the students that don't vote, or is it the student government?
I mean, well, I don't need my I would think, simply, to answer your question simply, that if you want a representative government, then students have to get out and vote. And the fact that students aren't getting out to vote is a problem that the student government has. And that problem could be partially attributed back to the student government. So let's say that we have an administration that caters only to one type of people. We've got an administration that maybe caters specifically to athletes or to liberal arts majors or degrees or what have you. Then they're not going to get out the vote effectively. So if you don't get out the vote effectively, then you're not going to have a representative government. That's the same on a big scale, the same on a small scale. I'm not going to put blame on any one entity. I think the student government does a good job with the resources that they're handling and with the situation that they're in generally.
I absolutely agree with Connor. I think there is a problem with us not turning out, but there is a problem coming from student government that they don't make their elections known. They don't really advertise any of this stuff. I think that they don't represent us and that they use their funds for stuff that we really don't need around here, nor do we want around here. They use things like architectural wow factor to sell us an LBJ building that we really honestly could be spending a lot less money on. I just really think, quite honestly, we have a pretty awful student government.
All right, I know you say you don't blame the people, but I have a dissenting opinion. I absolutely blame the people. People elect the government they deserve, and you don't go out to elect people. Guess what? Government's gonna run rampant, and they're gonna screw around everyone like the cockroaches they are. That's my opinion on the governments. So yes, if you didn't hold a tyrannical government, you didn't get out to get elected. Guess what? They're gonna go out, do whatever they want. You don't hold them accountable. You're gonna have our President Obama problem. Boom. All right, on to our last people.
I'd like to first point out that the kind of things that the student government does deal with now are issues that the student body is really concerned with, and that really if we do want to make change, we need to take it upon ourselves as students to create coalitions and have our voice heard, because we've seen in the past that it has been the case that they're not really representing our interests. And the student government, as a Democrat said, does not at all make their elections known, does not make what they're doing known. And I think that's kind of, a reflection of what we deal with in government outside of the university today. There is no transparency, and I think that in order to combat that, we need to move past student government and kind of take it upon ourselves to take responsibility.
Just as a short addition to that, I think it kind of reflects the broader political spirit. I think the reason people don't vote, in addition to not being really actively informed about it, is because they know it doesn't matter. Student government votes on t-shirts, they vote on sports attendance. This is not stuff that actually matters. So real quick, I'd like to plug an event coming up April 13th. The Million Student March is going to be happening at 12 o'clock in Old Main. Everyone who wants to fight for freeze of tuition and, what's that? Oh yeah, Black Liberation Collective is going to be joining us. We got some movement convergence going on. Come out, 12 o'clock, 13th Old Main.
So my question is going to kind of move towards the right side a little bit with YL, I guess, would probably be who I'm going to ask. So in your society, one pretty much without a government, almost, well, very limited government, what would prevent the corporations from exploiting the people of our nation? What would actually be there in place to protect the people from corporations?
Okay, so you would have to assume that right now that there's protection for the people. I would argue that right now the cartel is the government. It's the government that takes our liberties. It's the government that throws us in cages. It's the government that systematically robs our property and our wealth from us. So any shift away from that, yeah, I mean, you're asking me to take something away that we already have right now. And I think, you know, you talk about exploitation, you know, exploitation is directly related to ignorance. If you allow yourself to be exploited through anything other than government, which has a monopoly on force, then you carry part of that responsibility for that exploitation.
Next question.
We're to put blame on like the slaves and people we've exploited, and that's the regulation, right? It's up to them to not be exploited and, you know, be pushed to Western values and Western religions and okay.
I don't know how much more I could.
I just feel so lucky to go to school with someone in the 1% who really, you know, gets it.
Yeah, I don't really think I could add anything more to that. I think, unfortunately, if you think that it's the fault of the exploited, that they're being exploited, you might be privileged.
All right.
It seems that we're winding down to the end of our program.
We got 3 minutes and 3 more questions.
You want to?
Let's push it through.
All right, so my question aimed towards the people that were against the funding for Planned Parenthood. Funding for Planned Parenthood is always talked about like we're deciding whether or not to give them a free check. But when we fund Planned Parenthood, it's funding through Medicare. It's Medicare, which is already a system that's set up for all sorts of different doctors. So when somebody with Medicare goes to the doctor to get a colonoscopy, that is the government funding that colonoscopy. So when we talk about being against government funding as a whole, the rest of Medicare still stands. So how would you say, because I heard a lot about being against against funding Planned Parenthood as a stand against government spending, but what would you say to the rest of Medicare that is still standing despite the fact that we defunded Planned Parenthood?
I would say that if there's any way that we could cut money in the government, whether it comes through Medicare, Medicaid, directly from the taxpayers' pockets, from wherever, if we could cut that money out and keep it from going to an organization which takes away the life of an unborn child, then we need to do that.
If Medicare does cover this, and under Obamacare, many forms of birth control are covered. Why do we need Planned Parenthood? Why can't you just go to your private doctor? There are private abortion clinics, and Planned Parenthood charges for abortion. But I think the point is that if Medicare and Obamacare cover birth control, I don't see why Planned Parenthood.
I don't know if you have misunderstood our position, but we don't agree with Medicare or Medicaid either. We're not picking and choosing. Like, it's not just Planned Parenthood that we don't agree with. We disagree with the entire foundation.
Medicare is a little bit different from Social Security, but there is a correlation here. But how many people in this room know that the guy who makes $50 million a year pays the exact same amount of Social Security as the guy that makes $125,000? See, very few of you knew that. And Medicare actually continues on. It encompasses all of your income. And there's also the other side of that. I mean, I've been an employer for a dozen years now, and I don't think a lot of people realize that the employer matches the contributions from the employee. So when I take 7.65% out of the checks of my employees, I also have to pony up 7.65%. And you know, so it's not as small as you think. It's 15.3% in the aggregate.
I think we have time for one last question, and then we'll call it done for the Q&A section.
So in terms of economics, I think anyone who's taken economics 1310 basically knows the more money you earn, the more you have to invest to earn more money. That's just basic economics. You have more to invest. If the system in America right now is so flawed, how come after taxes, America currently has basically we have more per paycheck per month than any other nation in the world adjusted for taxes. Additionally, if it's so bad, I realize the rich are going to get richer because they have more to invest. But if the middle class also improves, that's also something that has to be taken into account. The top is going to always improve because they have more money. What's important is as long as the middle class is improving, no won't be as high because we don't have as much to invest to supplement our income. But if the middle class is improving, the top can get richer, but if the middle class is also improving, is that not the important thing?
Right, but the middle class is not improving. The middle class is collapsing.
I'm saying
and the people at the top are
America
not
after
investing.
America after taxes earns the most Americans on average per month.
On average, look at the median.
That's what I'm looking at.
The median, not the GDP, but the income right at the middle. Median.
Were you about to compare that with other countries? Because that's largely irrelevant.
Like, because then by that standard, then whenever you go to Mexico, then everybody's so rich. No, it's just Carlos Slim making everybody look rich.
I mean, it's adjusted.
Take it as an average.
It's adjusted by U.S. dollars.
I know, but you're looking at the average, not the median.
The average can be manipulated when you have so many that have so much and so many that have so little. That draws it to like
If you have
the average, it like throws
right,
off
but
the
what
numbers entirely. So you have to look at the median.
Right. I'm not saying that the mean can't be skewed, but I'm saying if you're arguing that it's higher because there's so many people earning more, is that not a good thing? I realize this is the one I'm looking at right now is
people that earn nothing and then one person dumps like a shit ton. It's gonna make it look like it's good and it's not.
on average though across
Right, on average,
countries,
exactly.
it balances out. That's statistics.
It's largely irrelevant.
You're gonna have skew, but if,
All right. Is there one specific question you want to ask, or?
basically, if America on average is earning in the median, you're right. We weren't number one. We were number 3. I can't pull it up right now, but mean was number 1. Median was number 3. If we're in such a bad place, why is that the case?
Because we are not. I mean, you're saying that we're not in a bad state. The middle class is in a good state.
I'm saying relative to everyone else, adjusted
Right, so
for
if
GDP.
everyone's doing shitty, that means that we should feel okay by doing
Everyone,
less shitty.
I'm saying you're relating it to what though? You're saying we're doing shitty, but if everyone in the world is doing worse than us, that's not shitty.
I want to thank everybody for coming out tonight. If you need to sign up for one of the classes to get extra credit, make sure you do that before you leave. One last round of applause for all of the political organizations.